Pretty eyes, pretty thighs, shawty, she a dime. Demon girl, evil eyes, she be telling lies. Slim waist,
All right, so today it is my pleasure to interview Dr. Michael Deem, a venture capital advisor and startup founder. He's also the former chair of bioengineering at Rice University. So, Dr. Deem, thank you for being part of this episode. In light of such a successful career, can you start you taking us back and telling us about your background?
Sure, pleasure to be on your show. I've seen you interviewed so many great people in the last few months, so really honored to be on your list of people as well. I guess some time ago, I got my BS in chemical engineering from Caltech, got my PhD also chemical engineering from UC Berkeley. I went to Harvard, I did a postdoc in physics. While I was out there, I was director of drug design at a company called Curagen. I was the number 10 person. We had a nice 100 million IPO some time ago. I always wanted to be a professor, so I went to UCLA. I got tenure there in 4 years. A couple years later, Rice University recruited me. I helped build their biological efforts. I started the first PhD program in the US with synthetic biology on the title. We even beat Harvard on that. Pam Silver was one of our advisors. She really congratulated us. That was, I guess, now 10, 12 years ago. We might call that engineering biology now. I was chair of the bioengineering department at Rice. It's a top 10 department. I was responsible for about 400 people, about 27 million budget. I always liked working with small companies. Probably the biggest one was Ion Torrent Systems. I was the number 3 person there. I did all the original engineering calculations. That eventually was sold to Thermo Fisher for 2.3 billion. I enjoyed that. I liked working with small companies. I decided to join venture capital as an entrepreneur in residence with Khosla Ventures. There, I helped evaluate companies for portfolio inclusion. I helped mentor about 5 of our companies. One of them, the CEO, was my old student, my old TA from a long time ago. I helped set his go-to-market strategy, and they just did a potential billion-dollar deal with Merck. I helped incubate about 5 companies at Khosla. I really enjoyed that, and this is now what I work on.
Yeah, man. So I want to go to you got a chemical engineering in BS and MS, then you moved to physics. I'm just asking, how do you move from these two? Because they seem really different.
Sure. So chemical engineering, back in the day, it's a pretty broad degree. Many of us have gone in very many different directions. Probably half of us now are in the bioengineering space. So I sort of transitioned from a chemical engineer to a bioengineer. My PhD advisor was a physical chemist, and then my postdoc advisor was a physicist. So I have a background in statistical mechanics and physics. And this is a nice lens that we can use to understand and model and engineer the world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you mentioned during your PhD you were director of a drug design at Curagen. So why did you start out in Curagen? Like, was it like a friend asked you to work there, or was it something else?
Sure. Curagen was a pretty interesting company. It was started by 2 graduates from Yale. And then also they had met each other at Carnegie Mellon as undergraduates. And then one of them had gone to Berkeley as a PhD student. So when I was just graduating from Berkeley, that one, the president, he was out looking for people and my name came up. So I had a meeting with Greg Wendt, the president of Curagen. It went pretty well. I met the CEO, Jonathan Rothberg. He's a very talented entrepreneur, and I decided to join them. It was very early in the days of drug design by what we now call phage display.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I want to get to your research you did when you were a professor. So you developed methods to quantify vaccine effectiveness and antigenic distance for influenza. So can you describe more about your methods?
Sure. So influenza, it's a virus, right, that maybe 5 to 15% of us get every year. It generally goes from birds to pigs to humans. So it's evolving not only in humans, but it's also evolving in the birds. So we get a vaccine for influenza. It's available every year in the Northern Hemisphere. That vaccine, we get it around October. It's manufactured around July. And the World Health Organization and the national health bodies decide which strains to put in the vaccine between January and March. What we worked on was, how can we predict the effectiveness of the vaccine? The flu mutates from year to year. That's why we need to redesign the vaccine every year. And when the vaccine is manufactured, there are differences between the original strains and the strains that end up in the vaccine. those differences between the vaccine and the flu can affect how well the vaccine protects us. We worked to quantify the effectiveness of the vaccine, and the R squared between our predictions and what we see in humans is quite high. It's about 90%. So it's about 3 times more predictive than the standard gold standard models in the field, the ferret models.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I just want to ask, I mean, just recently we had COVID and the COVID vaccine came out. Was there a method used to quantify COVID effectiveness?
This
The
is an
vaccine
interesting future development of our approach. Yeah, so for the flu, our vaccine effectiveness calculation methods, we call it p-epitope, they're used by national health authorities on 6 of the 7 continents of the world. The only one that doesn't use it is Antarctica. That's because there's nobody there.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a natural extension would be to look at the COVID vaccines, right? Because COVID is pretty similar to the flu. It mutates every year. We'll need to redesign the vaccines for COVID. And how do we predict when new vaccines will be needed? Our approach is one way to begin to answer that question.
Yeah, and next, you also developed the theory of immune pressure on the virus. So can you talk more about it?
Sure. So the virus evolves every year, and it's evolving based upon pressure from the immune system. Our immune system recognizes the virus, the antibodies will recognize the virus, and this will prevent the virus from infecting us. And if the virus is to persist, it's a living organism in conjunction with the host species. For the virus to continue to exist, it has to evade that immune pressure. And it does it by making mutations in the regions of the virus that the immune system recognizes. So particularly in those epitope regions, there are lots of mutations, and it's the vaccine and our immune system that's putting those pressures on the virus to evolve.
Mm. Yeah, so I know you also did research on predictive of physiology. So what is it and what framework did you develop for it?
Sure. So we were working with a critical care surgeon. One of the issues is in breathing machines. People, about 70% of the people in ICUs are on breathing machines. And one of the questions is when can they be taken off? You'd like to take the person off the breathing machine as soon as possible because you'd like to have them breathing for themselves and developing their lung muscles. You'd rather not have them on breathing machines if not necessary. But conversely, you don't want to take them off too early because if they can't breathe for themselves, then well, we need them on that breathing machine. So we worked on predicting when people could be taken off the breathing machine. In the general setting, what we were thinking towards is, can you predict 5 minutes ahead what will happen to a person? And really the patients that the doctors need to focus on are those patients that are going to have an issue 5 minutes from now. If you could predict that, it'd be very helpful in the ICU for the nurses and the doctors taking care of the patients.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and also I think your lab in Rice developed the widely used DFAX and ZEFSA methods for zeolites. So what is a zeolite and what are these methods used for in zeolites?
Zeolite is a word, it comes from the Greek, it means boiling stone. You probably use them in the chemistry lab. They're used as desiccants, they dry out liquids. More generally, we're here in Texas, so we refine a lot of petroleum. Mm-hmm. In the process of refining petroleum, zeolites are used. So zeolites turn the long oil chain molecules into the short gasoline molecules. Pretty much every molecule of gasoline that is burned in a car goes through a zeolite. So I've worked on zeolites for quite a while, over 30 years. One of our specialties is solving the structures of zeolites. We use the ZEFSA2 method to solve zeolite structures, and about a dozen zeolites. There are about 200 known zeolites, about 150 synthetic zeolites. About a dozen of those, their structure has been solved with our ZEFSA2 method. And then DFAX is a way of calculating X-ray diffraction patterns from zeolites. Zeolites often have a certain type of defect structure, and that makes the X-ray diffraction pattern a bit blurred. We can calculate that pattern.
All right, so my next question now is like, you were the chair of the bioengineering department at Rice, and you doubled the department's funding, I think, or earlier you mentioned. I was just wondering, like, why do people like you? Because I've had a lot of people, and they've done the same thing like you. Why do you go back to the, I guess the entrepreneurship world when you're having so much success in your lab and as and academic administrator?
Sure. So this is sort of the second half of my life here. I'm interested in doing something new. It's always exciting to help others invent the future. In entrepreneurship, we are working to make the world a better place. I'm focused on healthcare, diseases of old age, diseases of infection. These are all things that affect billions of people in the world. And if we can alleviate suffering, that's fantastic.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, I want to talk more about ion Turing systems. So what's product did ion Turing specifically make that made it sold for 2.3 billion, of course?
Sure. Ion Torrent systems, there, the idea was to sequence DNA. This is one of the third generation sequencing companies. We were sequencing DNA by watching the pH change as the enzyme copies the DNA. So we would put maybe 100,000 copies of the DNA on a bead in a small well. At the base of the well is a pH sensor, and we watch the pH change as the DNA is copied. We had about 18% of the sequencing market at one point. Ion Torrent was sold to Life Technologies, and then that part of Life was sold to Thermo Fisher for 2.3 billion. It's still used because it's part of the FDA approval for a number of commercial products that are sold by Thermo Fisher.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I want to get into your entrepreneurship life. I know you founded a consulting company called Certis. So my question was, what got you into consulting?
Sure. So it's interesting to work with companies, both large and small, to develop products of the future.
Uh-huh. And so now the Certis usually advise like early stage companies or late stage or big companies that are on the stock market. Like what the question is like what companies do you should advise? Is it like startups or is it like more established unicorns or like public companies?
Sure. In the past, I've tended to work with larger established companies when I was an academic. Now I'm more involved with entrepreneurship as a venture capitalist. So we'll work with startups as well.
How about like oh, so Certis is like part of the thing?
Certus is one way that we engage with companies, including startups. Yes.
So have you heard has the public heard of any of the companies you probably work with as an advisor?
Sure. We tend to, not talk about that openly, but again, it's large companies, multinationals, as well as small startups. We love working with people to develop technology and to make the world a better place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I know there's also other big consulting firms. There's McKinsey, there's Boston Consulting Group, and there's Accenture, right? So my question is, what makes Certis different from these big firms that would attract entrepreneurs to choose Certis and not these big four and not the big four consulting firms?
Sure, it's interesting. I'll answer that question in a broad sense. Some of the venture capitalists are coming from the consulting field. So we'll see people from McKinsey, we'll see people from the Boston Consulting Group. Some of them even have started their own venture firms. Boston Consulting Group, for example, has its own venture fund. We're a small boutique consulting company. We will be helping large companies where we have specific expertise, and then we'll be helping startups as they try to make the world a better place with their technologies.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, sorry, I saw your link and it said you're not working at Certis anymore. So my question is, it's like, why do you leave Certis, like the consulting company you founded?
So Certus still is active.
Mm-hmm. But I saw it says from your LinkedIn bio, it says you ended your position as CEO.
So we're still active at Certus. We're still active in helping companies, pursue their mission to make the world a better place.
So you're the entrepreneur in resident at Casola Ventures. So yeah, why do you choose Casola Ventures specifically instead of other venture capitalist firms?
Khosla is a great place. Khosla grows the money with a very high internal rate of the return. They're a tier one venture capital firm. They're one of the best in the world. Vinod himself, he can see 5 years into the future. He's quite a fantastic person. He's very connected in Silicon Valley, and they've done a great job of helping others invent the future. It's an inspiring
Hmm.
place to be with.
So what does I mean? By the way, I've seen a lot of this entrepreneur in resident roles at like on LinkedIn and that the VC firm is trying to find. So what does the EIR specifically do? Maybe.
It depends on the firm. So an entrepreneur in residence is someone who they work with a usually venture capital firm. They bring expertise in some area. It might be business, it might be scientific, it might be strategy. And then on the other side, they're helping the venture capital firms evaluate startups. They're particularly looking to incubate companies. So one of the best investments a venture capital firm can do is to incubate a company. They can get in very early. They can start the company. Many of the venture capital firms are focusing on this these days, and entrepreneurs in residence are one of the natural ways that a VC firm can incubate a company.
So, as a venture to these startup companies, like what are some advice that you usually give to these startup companies that you work with?
Sure. So let me answer that in two ways. First, from the venture side, generally we're looking at four legs of the stool for a startup. We're looking at the executive quality. We are looking at the market. Is it a large market? Is the timing particularly good? Is there a reason to do this company now? And then finally, what is the protective moat around the company? In the deep tech space, that would be what is the intellectual property of the company? So those are the four things that the companies want to be focusing on. And for a seed startup and incubation, you don't have to have all four, but three of the four would be quite good to have. That would make you really strong. Then I would say on the direct advice to the founder side, it's always difficult to start a company that's going to require more persistence than you imagined. So grit and persistence is a big feature for founders, and really focus on your mission. Why is it that your company will make the world a better place? Focus on that.
Yeah, and then my next question is: have you ever worked with any founders who were like kind of hard to work with that like the VC partners had to take over the company?
Sometimes this will happen. And it also depends on the VC firms. Some firms are more likely to do that. Some are less likely to do that. Of course, as a VC, we'd prefer to invest in a company that's got great management, right? That's one of the four legs of the stool. If we're doing an incubation, then we can put in the management. Sometimes that can work well.
Mm-hmm. So no, this is more specific to people who are having startups now. So what factors do you think are most important in making sure startups are able to secure more funding? Especially in the biotech field where you need a lot of money to do drug trials and stuff.
So for founders, think about where the market is going. If it's a tough market, well, then that's a good time to hire people, but it's also difficult to raise money. So think about where you will raise money from. Think about what areas are particularly hot right now. And if your idea aligns with an area that's hot, that will be good for you. That'll be good for your valuation. It'll be good for your ability to raise money. The number of competitors shouldn't be too large, right? You don't want to have maybe more than 5 or so competitors in the area. You don't want to have 0 because that doesn't quite make sense. And you don't want to have more than 5. That's too competitive. So you want to be one of the leaders in the field and continue to develop your network broadly. Your network will really help you fundraising. They'll help you with ideas. They'll help you with mentoring.
Yeah, and then so I have a question. So I don't know if you watched Shark Tank before, but basically, the Shark Tank, they're entrepreneurs. They pitch their ideas to the sharks for investments. So is what happens in Shark Tank kind of similar to what happens when in real life, I guess?
In the deep tech area, which I'm most familiar with, we're generally looking at companies that don't have sales yet. On Shark Tank, it is smaller companies, but typically they're already having sales. So maybe more of the
Mm,
consumer type of company. In the deep tech area, we're more looking at the founders, we're looking at the intellectual property, we're looking at the idea. We're thinking, can this company be a leader in this field in 3 to 5 to 7 years?
So I think another characteristic issue I think most startups encounter is cash flow and is cash flow mainly. So a lot of biotech startups usually have negative cash flow. I've had some guests on there and they said their startup when they started had negative cash flow. They weren't making any money. So what advice do you usually give to startups to try to get them to bring in revenue and have positive cash flow eventually?
Sure. So in the deep tech space, it's quite difficult to have revenue. In the consumer space, yes, you want to have revenue as soon as possible. If you have a SaaS model, for example, you're selling software as a service, that's fantastic. That's great for building revenue. The incremental cost of an additional customer in a SaaS model is almost zero. So a SaaS model is a really great way to go. Using artificial intelligence is a great way to go. It can dramatically reduce costs and increase the range of products that you can offer. In the deep tech space, generally we will be funded by investors for quite some number of years, 5, 7 years. So we will be having negative cash flow for a while in the anticipation of very positive cash flow once the technology is proven and gets to market. Some companies will go after grants from the government. In many cases, though, this can be a distraction. My feeling is better to let the academic co-founders continue their academic work on grants and the company pursue the implementation and the development through venture funding.
Yeah, so why do you think grants are more distracting? I mean, I think I know Lumina. I had the co-founder on there, and he said that he was applying grants to fund the company. So why do you think that's more of a distraction?
A lot of times grants can have aims which are not really aligned with those of the
Hmm.
company, and the company can get distracted by pursuing the grants instead of pursuing the technology and pursuing the customers.
Hmm. So what are some characteristics that make a good VC or VC firm?
Sure. So VCs, um, if we think about a VC firm, they have a dual role. One role is to support founders and to help founders invent the future. And on the flip side, they have a responsibility to their investors, what are called the limited partners, to invest that money wisely and to grow the money. So the general partners of the VC firm, they will see both sides of that. The general partners will be interacting with the investors to secure funds for the venture capital firm. And then they will be designing the portfolio construction. They will be looking at the types of companies they want to invest in, what stage the companies are invested in, what are the size of the companies. And then the other people in the firm, for example, the partners, they will be sourcing deals. They'll be looking for good companies. They'll be supporting the companies that they invest in. So an understanding of the company formation and company running process is very helpful. VCs who were former operators, they can be very effective because they understand the difficulties of running a company. And in some sense, VC is a bit of a service model, right? They're serving both their investors and the companies that they invest in. So for us to keep that in mind and to maintain some humility is always a good thing.
Yeah, so I just want to talk. I think last year something Silicon Valley Bank crashed. So did it affect Casella and your startups in any other way?
Sure, that was a pretty interesting experience. So Silicon Valley Bank is a bank that 70 or 80% of startups had their money in. Many of the big VC firms had their money in that bank. Many of them sort of required their startups to put their money in that bank as well. And when their investment strategy ran into difficulties, it was a big concern for the industry. venture capital is helping invent the future economy of America. So the US wisely decided to help out Silicon Valley Bank. Now there are a number of other banks offering services that are similar to Silicon Valley Bank. So startups don't have to use just Silicon Valley Bank. There are 3 or 4 pretty good alternatives out there right now.
And yeah, I just want to say regarding startups you mentioned, so those startups had no problem, right? With Silicon Valley's
For
bank,
about a
right?
week, people were quite nervous, right? Because both the venture capitalists had their money in the bank and the startups had their money in the bank. There was quite a bit of startup money in Silicon Valley Bank. So for about a week, people were concerned what was going to happen to all this money.
Yeah, so biotech starts to face like a downturn in funding and IPOs in 2022 and 2023. How do you think it's going to be uh reverse this year?
Sure. So the number of deals in biotech startups, especially pharmaceutical startups, is down about 70% in dollar terms the last 2 years. The IPO window has been pretty closed. This is a good time to invest. So historically, when there's been a big reset like that, this is likely the bottom or near the bottom of a trough. And historically, this has been a good time to invest. So people who are investing now, people who are raising funds now, this will probably be a good time for them. They will probably have good returns in the future.
Yeah, so have you ever worked with any longevity companies?
Sure. So longevity is an interesting area. Longevity has a big attraction for people who are older, of course. You know, you're still young, but as you get older, you'll begin to think about longevity.
Mhm.
Um, Longevity and the ability to reverse diseases that prematurely cause aging are pretty interesting areas of investment.
So I had a scientist on, his name is Dr. Eric Verdeen. He's the CEO of Buck Institute. And he said that like he thinks a lot of these longevity or anti-aging companies are scams. Do you think a lot of them are just scams?
That I don't know. I know when I was at Khosla, we did support a longevity study with Eric Verdeen at the Buck. They're one of the premier research institutes on aging. NFX and their general partner Omri, they did a nice video series featuring the Buck Institute and talking about longevity. So I think serious people at tier 1 venture capital firms are investing in some longevity companies.
Yeah, because just not gonna lie, but I've seen a lot of these anti-aging companies like trying to market their supplements, and it's got me thinking if those supplements are actually working or is it just or they're just promoting it, due to like the trend or something. So that's why I asked that question. You were also the general partner at Smart Health Catalyzer. So what is Smart Health?
At Smart Health, we are a venture studio. Our mission is to help the inventions of the Midwest access the venture capital market. About 30% of the National Institute of Health dollars go to the Midwest, but only about 6% of the biotech venture capital funding goes to the Midwest. So there's really an underserved opportunity there. There's a geographic potential for venture capital in the Midwest. And we are helping the professors and the doctors in the Midwest who have creative and inventive ideas to begin to access venture capital. We're helping them invent the future.
Yeah,
We just
so
did a Best of the Bio Midwest competition. You might see that. I think about 50 companies were reviewed, and we had the top 10 present to VCs.
mhm.
It was about a month ago. And we did it the prior year as well. It's a very effective event.
So no, with working with Casella and Smart Health, do you guys work with any students who might have any ideas?
Absolutely. So one of the key features of our program is we have internships. We have students from Northwestern, we have students from the University of Chicago. We have students quite broadly who help us evaluate the companies. These student interns spend 3 weeks per company, and they get a pretty good exposure to what venture capital would be like for a partner. And many of them now have gone on to work in venture capital firms. So we're quite proud of our interns.
Yeah. How many student founders? Have you any worked with any student founders? Maybe student founders who want to have their own startup?
At Smart Health, we tend to work more with the professors or the doctors who have an idea that we'd like to license. I don't think we worked with a student founder there yet. We work with the interns, the students who are interested in entering the venture capital industry. At Khosla, we've worked with student founders from more established labs, right? So it might be a student of Eric Verdeen that you mentioned, who's president of the Buck and who's got students. Or it might be a student of Francis Arnold at Caltech, who's got some cool technology for protein evolution. And that can work well if the student comes from a strong group and has a strong network.
Mm-hmm. So, do you think most of royalty splits from the IPs between the college and the research is a bit unfair? I've had multiple researchers here complain about it, so I was asking your opinion.
I think the general model it depends on the university, but typically a third of the revenue goes to the researcher. A third might go to the department, and then a third might go to the president of the university. That seems perhaps that's reasonable. The university has been supporting the professor for a long time. In some cases, the government also has rights in the invention, right? Typically, there was government funding that was used to develop the product. So oftentimes the government will have some rights as well.
Yeah, so man, now you're CEO of a stealth startup company. So why do some startups go in stealth mode?
Well, until we're really ready to go public, it's better. We develop our technology, and when we're ready to tell the world about us, that's when we go public. That's when we come out of stealth.
Okay, what are some similarities and differences between academia and the uh, entrepreneurship world?
Sure. So that's an interesting question. One is mentorship. This is a similarity. So in academia, as a professor, I mentored hundreds of students. At the undergraduate level, I mentored thousands of students. We're really helping others develop their potential. And in entrepreneurship, that is one of the things that the CEO of the company is doing, right? He's or she is mentoring the employees and their colleagues in the company. As a VC, we're mentoring the founders of the companies. We're also mentoring our fellow VCs in the firm. One of the differences is in academia, we tend to work a little bit more isolated, right? We're working with our group, maybe we're collaborating with another group. Certainly when we go to conferences and we publish our results, we're relatively focused on our own work. In the VC world, a VC a fund might have an investment in 30 or 50 companies, right? So they would have a pretty broad portfolio. One partner might have 3 to 10 companies that she's invested in. So it's a little bit of a broader perspective in the VC world. And the amount of change that we can bring to the world is a little bit broader on the VC side, right? VC, relative to all of investment, VC is a tiny fraction of the market. But compared to academic funding, VC funding is significant. We can have more of an impact in terms of helping make the world a better place and helping invent the future from a financial point of view in terms of the investment point of view on the VC side. So that's a little bit of a difference.
Yeah, and so I read Tony Fadell's biography. He mentioned that the VC and the startups, when the VC invests in the startup, it's more like a marriage kind of thing. Maybe think about it in a certain way. So how do you make sure you have a good relationship with the founders you work with?
This is a really interesting question. So the VC and the founder will be together for quite a while, right? It could be 5, 7, 10 years. And that partner will be the voice of support for the company within the VC fund. And that partner will be the one that mentors the founder through all of the difficulties. The founder might have done this once before, twice before, or maybe never before, right? But the VC is probably done this tens or hundreds of times and has probably seen it thousands of times. So the VC has a lot of experience that she can use and can help guide and mentor and advise the companies. It's wise for the companies to spend some time to get to know the VCs, to talk to the companies that have been successful and have failed under the VC, to hear the experience of other founders, see if this is a good firm for her.
Yeah, and so regarding the more experienced entrepreneurs, now I'm talking like Bob Langer from I'm talking about, like, he has a lot of companies.
He's a big hero in the chemical engineering
Yeah,
field.
I know.
Now he's
So
a bioengineer, but yeah, he's one of the giants of chemical engineering and now bioengineering. He was one of your inventors of Moderna.
Yeah, and so you went on my podcast. So I was wondering, like, let's say your venture capitalist works with him. So do you give him a bit more freedom? Like, do you give him less advice?
Yeah. So he is one of those golden founders. When we look at the four legs of the stool, the management and the founders, he is a check plus in that column. And the gravitas that he would bring is just very substantial. It makes it easier to raise money. It makes it easier to attract the CEO. It makes it easier to attract employees. So there's a big network effect when you work with an academic founder like Bob Langer.
So what advice do you receive during your career that shaped your professional success?
Sure. So early on, we were working to develop and to discover things on our own. But as we get older and we develop our network, we're really helping empower others. So our mission changes a little bit, begin to think about helping others invent the future, and to really understand how difficult that process is and have empathy for founders. This is something that's helpful for us to learn.
So what is there any more advice you would want to give to students who want to become scientists or entrepreneurs?
Sure. So science and engineering is one of the best ways that we use to improve the world, right? We grow the economy, we reduce patient suffering. We're generally inventing a better future for ourselves through science and engineering. And entrepreneurship is the practical way of implementing that. So go ahead, find an entrepreneurship course within your school, maybe something in the business school, maybe do an entrepreneurship internship with a venture studio like with Smart Health Catalyzer or with one of the other venture firms, and see if you like it.
So do you have anything more to talk about that I maybe never asked the audience or asked you?
This was great. So my mission now is to help others invent the future, to really alleviate suffering of a significant number of patients, and to make the world a better place.
Yeah, so
my time with you today.
So thank you, Dr. Deem, for being part of this episode and giving me the opportunity to talk to you so people can get to know more about your insights in the biotech and the business world.
Sure, of course. Thank you for showcasing